Ever feel like some of your friendships, the ones that you thought would last forever, have kind of changed as you've gotten older?
Yeah, it's a pretty common experience.
It is. Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into why friendships evolve and sometimes even fade as we get older.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. We're going to be looking at how what we look for in a friend changes, how our connections change, and even how we view ourselves in our friendships.
It's more than just losing friends, it's a whole shift in perspective, really.
Exactly. And our goal is to see all of these changes not as like failures or something bad, but as a normal part of life. Yeah.
Absolutely. Understanding the why can make all the difference.
So let's start with how the whole idea of friendship changes as we grow up. Like, remember being a kid and friendships were all about whoever was around. It was about quantity, right?
Oh, totally. It was like whoever was in your class, on your street, or your soccer team, instant friends.
Yeah, proximity, shared activities, that was it.
hmm
But then adulthood hits
hmm
and things get a bit more, I don't know, complex.
For sure. As adults, it becomes less about having a ton of friends and more about the depth of those connections.
Right. Like you start putting more effort into friendships that actually mean something to you, the ones that align with your values, where you are in life, all that.
Exactly. And those goals and responsibilities you're talking about, they also play a role in why some of those earlier friendships, the ones just based on proximity, start to drift apart. It's natural, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's the whole time factor. I mean, think about it. Free time as an adult, it's almost like a luxury, right?
Yeah.
Between work and bills and maybe even family, it's like there are just not enough hours in the day.
So true. And that lack of time really affects our ability to, well, be spontaneous.
Oh, for sure.
Hmm.
Remember when hanging out was as easy as, like, hey, want to grab pizza? Now it's all about planning weeks in advance.
Totally. Socializing goes from this effortless thing to like a scheduled event.
Yeah.
And yeah, it becomes a lot harder to just be spontaneous.
And then on top of that, we have social media, this constant stream of updates and pictures. It can feel like we're still connected to people, even if we haven't actually talked to them in ages.
That's the illusion of connection, right? You see people's posts, you like their pictures, you might even exchange a few messages, but it's not the same as a genuine, meaningful conversation.
It's not. And you can actually have tons of online connections, but still feel incredibly lonely because you're missing that true emotional depth.
And that brings us to the distinction between solitude and isolation, which I think is really important.
It is, because sometimes being alone can be a choice, like a way to recharge and reconnect with yourself.
Absolutely, solitude can be healthy. But then there's isolation, which is more about feeling disconnected even when you don't want to be.
And that can stem from different things like big life changes, moving to a new city, maybe anxiety about putting yourself out there.
Or even just not making the effort to reach out. And this kind of isolation, the unintended kind, that's the one that can really have a negative impact on our well-being.
Yeah. And sometimes, this might sound familiar, you start to wonder, am I even interesting anymore? Like you feel like your old interests have faded and you're not as fun or engaging as you used to be.
I think a lot of people feel that at some point, but it's not that you've become less interesting as a person. Your interests are just evolving, which is perfectly normal.
Right. It's part of growth. It's not a bad thing.
Exactly. The key is to find new ways to connect with people who share those evolving interests, those new passions and values.
It's about seeking out those like-minded individuals who get you, who you can have those deep conversations with.
Exactly. It's about finding your tribe. And sometimes the hardest part is actually taking that first step and reaching out.
Totally. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, well, if they really cared, they'd text me first.
Mhm.
But you know what? Everyone is so busy these days, it's not always about lack of caring.
It's not. Sometimes it just takes one person to break the ice and rekindle that connection.
I know it can be tough. There's that fear of rejection, or maybe your ego gets in the way.
But honestly, a simple message can go a long way. Just a, hey, been thinking about you. How are you?
It can be that easy.
Yeah.
So let's do a quick recap of what we've covered. We talked about how friendships naturally shift from quantity to quality over time.
And how changing priorities and just being busier in general can impact our social lives.
We also talked about how those online interactions, they're not a replacement for genuine connection.
And how choosing solitude is different from feeling isolated.
We also touched on how our self-perception of being interesting changes and the importance of, taking that initiative to reach out.
And I think the most important takeaway is that all these shifts in friendships, they're normal. They happen to everyone.
We do. And understanding that can really help you navigate those